Floor is yours.
So I will be talking about a narrower part of the distributional problem. And I think it's interesting to think about renewables because it's where I think we all agree that it's where it's cheapest and where there's basically you don't even need subsidies now for many of these measures. So given that a lot of it is already happening without much public financing, we might wonder, do we still need to worry about the inequities? Can it still backfire? And of course, the answer is yes, it can still backfire, and it is backfiring to a certain extent. So I wanted to talk about that both at the larger scale and at the small scale, rooftop solar being the main one. So what we know from renewables is that they are a blessing to electricity markets in general. So they have reduced wholesale prices, which has passed through to consumers depending on the market. It has allowed the entry of new producers, sometimes smaller producers, sometimes the larger ones that have diversified, but overall a lot of good clean energy coming in. It has kicked out the fossil fuels quite a bit, which we need, and it has allowed for cheap electricity, especially at the industrial level where they don't have to pay as many fees. There are some job impacts to job from renewables, and the legacy subsidies also had been an impact on consumers, but they are being removed because again now subsidies don't need subsidies anymore. For rooftop solar, it has decreased metered electricity demand. So if you look at the statistics of electricity demand, it might even look like it's going down, although that's the grid demand. It has reduced energy bills to adopters, which is a very good thing. It also has changed the patterns of consumption and prices, which has feedback into the wholesale market. But there's been this pocket of subsidies. And as we know from the literature, these subsidies have gone mostly to the very high income. So in general, there's a lot of rents that are coming from renewables. They have made energy much cheaper, and it was especially obvious during the energy crisis, with the cost of renewables being much, much cheaper than the natural gas alternative. But yes, we might still worry that if the rents are not shared among all the market participants, there could be some opposition. One example of opposition, for example, is in California, where there's been a massive growth in solar, and eventually it has led to some concerns that all the solar panels are going on top of the rich households and that it's making electricity very, very expensive for the households that are left behind. So in addition to this concern about the households being left behind, the ones that cannot adopt, which are typically the lowest income, there might be other potential inequities. One potential inequity when it comes to larger scale investment is that the marginal price of the electricity market will not always reflect the cheap costs that the generators have. So, for example, during the energy crisis, the marginal price in Spain was quite high. It was set by natural gas, the same as in the rest of Europe. In Spain, there's lots of renewables, but still the marginal price was directly passed through to consumers. So consumers saw a huge increase of marginal prices, obviously above and beyond what the average price, what had happened to average prices. The marginal price is still the right signal to send to people. We want to tell people um, that they should reduce electricity consumption at the margin when it's very expensive. But that marginal price basically affected the entire bill. So for some households, this had massive impacts. What's happening in the renewable market is that the rents itself, the money that these renewables are making, which during the crisis was very, very high, is typically ending up in the hands of the large players, not even the producers. So there might be some solar panels that are owned by very small companies, some wind farms that are owned by very small companies, but in reality they are under power purchase agreements. So the rents are typically going into the hands of large players, let it be incumbent traditional generators of electricity or large companies like, let's say, Amazon, who has a lot of decarbonized PPAs in the world. Another challenge of potential inequities is the fact that there is a lot of not in my backyard, depending on the region in Europe. and that tends to increase the barriers to enter. Many of the not in my backyard is justified by not letting the big companies put solar panels on windmills. But in reality, with all that not in my backyard, the ones that end up being able to install are indeed the large companies, and the smaller ones cannot go through all of these difficulties, except for maybe some pet iconic projects. When it comes to rooftop solar, the inequities are very visible. You can go to any map. I had some graphs here to show, but there's no need to. There's a very good correlation between the income in a given zip code and how much solar there is. This is true for California, Belgium, Spain, Australia, you name it. This can lead to inequities, in part because they are getting these oftentimes, in my opinion, too generous subsidies. You wouldn't need that large of a subsidy to justify the investment, especially for households who can afford it. And it can also lead to these death spiral concerns about having low-income households be stranded in the market, paying for very, very expensive legacy investments that now need to be rethought. And again, this is already happening in California. By the way, I'm focusing on renewable power, but a similar issue is coming up with natural gas investments and who will pay for the distribution of natural gas when we don't want natural gas in our homes. There's been some progress here with better net metering policies that are not so generous to the high-income households. But anytime you want to change these policies, you create a whole steaming pot for being against rooftop solar or being against renewables in general. There are now some papers that study how the financial burden of the subsidies is affecting political support. For example, the Groot, Gauthier, and Verboven have a paper looking at Belgium and how people have responded to these inequities. So here I wanted to talk also about some potential solutions. So on the larger scale side, together with Natalia Fabra and many other European economists, we propose that we try to centralize the purchases of power a bit more so that the households can get part of their purchases at average cost and only the marginal purchases at the marginal price. That would help if natural gas prices go up again. That would again allow the households to benefit from this cheap base power that's solar or wind. The cooperative model can also work, although this at the moment is not very popular, but this would be households, very small households directly participating into the purchase of larger scale generation. Again, it's not super common, but it can be financially attractive. That said, it will tend to attract the high-income households. On rooftop solar, I very much agree with Leonardo that community solar is a great opportunity. And I think at the European level, at the very least, what I see in Spain is that we need to facilitate the blueprint to make it much easier than it is now and facilitate adoption in general. For rooftop solar, healthier competition would also help split better the rents. So nowadays what happens is that you might not have financing and then a company will finance the solar panels for you, but the company will, of course, get the rents from you. So depending on your level of income, you could get a much better deal than another, depending on your ability to finance. It's part of the cost of capital, so it makes sense to a certain extent, but to the point that it can generate backlash against renewables, I think it's important to keep in mind that there shouldn't be huge differences in the types of deals that people can access to. Again, community solar would be a great way to make it very, very easy for people who don't even own an apartment, who cannot put solar panels anywhere, but we are very much behind. So I see a lot of improvement. I think in Europe, we are quite decided into making this happen, but any backlash that we have, say in renewables, say electric vehicles, say in any other adoption path, it really can make us go back quite a bit. And for example, my experience here in Barcelona, in the Catalan region, there was a huge not in my backyard movement, and we haven't managed to install a new installation of large renewable power for the last 5 to 6 years in a moment where the opportunity is huge. So seemingly small mistakes or seemingly small communication gaps can lead to a vast delay in implementation, which we cannot afford. So these were my quick thoughts on renewables. It's a bit more specific, but I hope for the case of renewables it was useful.